big thank you and welcome back. I reach out to my children and my children's children, great grandchildren someday, and extended family and friends I've made along the way. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Papa John's Scripture Notes. I'm just doing my best to share. Uh, I've been stuffing paper notes, footnotes between the ribs of the verses of Scripture for years, and many things I forget, but I'm so glad I shoved those little footnotes between the verses. As I reread the scriptures, it comes back to me, the things I've learned, and I just want to share these with my children in hopes that they can not be forgotten, these pearls of truth and just expanded understandings, because we inherit in the English Bible kind of a sanitized, whitewashed version of Scripture. We get the surface, we don't really get much deeper than that, I've discovered. So I have, as you know, scholars from different backgrounds as we go through the scriptures, and I think it's just a healthy way to expand our understanding and look at scriptures with fresh eyes, with eyes that see and a heart that's open. That's my hope. Now, Exodus chapter 2, let's get right into it. Verse 1, and there went a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. This is Brother Jared Halverson, our LDS scholar. He says, but in the Joseph who was sold into Egypt story, we got a chance for Reuben and Simeon and Judah to stand out and prove that they had changed, meaning that they had become converted. Well, now we get the opportunity to learn of Levi, or in this case, a pair of descendants from the tribe of Levi. In Exodus chapter 6, which we'll get to soon, we'll actually get to know their names as the verses listing the descendants of Reuben and Simeon and Levi. And as it goes through Levi in that chapter, actually, it gets to this verse, and Amram took him Jochebed, his father's sister, to wife, and she bare him Aaron and Moses. So there we get their names, but that's not until chapter 6. And Amram and Jochebed, the father and mother of Moses. Now it says that Jochebed was Amram's father's sister, so she's his aunt, which I know seems really strange by modern sensibilities. But don't forget, Brother Halverson says, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel and Leah were all related to each other before they got married to one another. It was more normal in that time period. Most of the time, it seems like it was a cousin or a niece, but in this case, it's an aunt. So was she older than Amram? We don't know. We don't know the details. She could have been younger. If it was a big family with a lot of kids and she was the youngest, something along those lines. But if she was older, why was she not married already? Was she widowed? Had she always been single? Was she passed over by people who didn't see just who this incredible daughter of the Levites was? Maybe like a Leah sort of situation. Brother Halverson says, I'm not sure, but this is a woman of incredible faith and fortune, as we are about to see. Verse 2, and the woman conceived, and then that's the bad news, and bare a son. Can you imagine, he says, Brother Halverson, can you imagine the devastation? I mean, the emotional roller coaster. A mother would be so excited to be pregnant, to be able to bring forth a child, and so important in terms of the Abrahamic covenant. And you've got a 50-50 chance that there will be rejoicing or absolute devastation. This is similar to the tragedy of a stillborn or a miscarriage, where you have paid such a price to bring forth a child into the world, and all that hope turns into absolute anguish when you realize you will not have the chance to raise this baby you have been bringing into existence. And Papa John, I've lost a grandchild right up like the day or two before birth. My oldest daughter lost her second son that way. And Papa John loves children, loves people. But when it comes to babies, especially small babies, I'd rather not hold your baby. And with my grandchildren, I'll hold them for a short time and hand them back to their mother. But when it came to that day, after that phone call, midday, I find myself down at the hospital. And I waited till after dark, into the evening, before I had a chance to hold my precious, perfect body grandson who had died just the day before he was born. Perfect in every way. And I will cherish and I hold to that sacred opportunity in this life to be together, to hold him in my arms. So I understand what Brother Howerson's talking about here. He continues, though, while she conceives, that's the good news, to bear a son is devastating news. What are we going to do? And the verse continues, when she saw him that he was a goodly child. Now, that word goodly, it can mean pleasant or agreeable or beautiful or choice or special or good. In fact, it's the same word used to, or in the creation account, when God looks at things and says it was good. But here, a mother is looking at her baby, and he is a goodly child. But she knows what Pharaoh requires, and she can't even say the words. There's no way I can do that. So, how does the verse end? With one of those most heroic acts any parent could go through. She hid him 3 months. Now, Brother Halverson adds, Josephus, we're talking 93 to 94 CE, the Common Era, adds this insight in his history, his book called The Antiquities of the Jews. He says if any parents should disobey Pharaoh and venture to save their male children alive, they and their families should be destroyed. So there's a Jewish historian at the time of Jesus hearkening back to this story and fleshing out some additional details. It wasn't just that Pharaoh would find out. This goes back even to the midwives. What was the danger if they stood up to Pharaoh? If they stood up to his face and said, absolutely not, I refuse, there's death for them too, a death they were probably willing to face. Well, it's the same with Amram and Jochebed here. The whole family is in danger as they decide to preserve the life of their son and little brother. And 3 months, can you imagine? I couldn't even make it through sacrament meeting when my kids were little without them crying out. No amount of Cheerios or colored books could stop them, Brother Howerson says. Imagine 3 months on constant high alert, the ceaseless stress if there's a cry and if the guards of Pharaoh happen to be walking through the streets or the alleyways of Goshen. No doubt they're going to come and look at the gender of that baby. I have to keep this infant newborn absolutely silent, or we all die. I'm shocked that they lasted that long. Brother Halverson ends his footnote with that comment. Now, our Hebrew scholar, Nehemiah, he says, why did she hide him for 3 months? One of the explanations given by Jewish commentators is that he was a preemie, and it wasn't unusual in the old days. You could have a preemie after 20 weeks and a baby will survive. My niece was like that, but in the old days, if the baby was born at 6 months, it still had a chance of surviving. And if the baby was born after 6 months, she could pretend she's still pregnant for 3 months or more. And after that, no one's going to buy it. So she might have given birth and then put a pillow underneath her garment to pretend she was still pregnant. So that might be why 3 months. Okay, I had never thought of that. Verse 3, and when she could no longer hide him, and Brother Halverson says, back to our LDS scholar, by the way, the word hide also means to treasure up, which is exactly what she had been doing those 3 months, treasuring every moment with this baby. But when she could no longer hide him, no longer keep her treasure concealed, the verse continues, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and dabbed it with slime and with pitch and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. Picture this loving mother, he says, holding this baby, laying him in an ark that they had pitched within and without, pitch covering it, atoning for it. And Papa John would add, atoning, the atonement, that word means covering. And in Hebrew, we'll talk more in the future about kafar, which means covering. So this ark is a symbol of a covering that is pitched into the state of being waterproof. And now it's a vessel. Think of your body and think of the atonement and Christ covering you in a similar way. We'll talk about that in the future when we get to the New Testament. So she's atoning like we saw in the story of Noah. Noah did the same thing with the ark as he covered it with pitch and built it. So this is a a small version of the large ark in a sense. This is a prototype or a model, a scale model. To place it in the flags by the river brink, there's no guarantee of continued safety. Brother Halverson says the modern equivalent to strapping Or he says, the Nile River was a super freeway of the ancient Egypt. There's no guarantee of continued safety. So putting this child in a basket, so to speak, is the modern equivalent to strapping a car seat to a skateboard and sending it down the freeway. Oh, wow. How do I do this? Speaking as if he's the mother. How do I commend my child? How do I send him out of my hands? Well, I can't, unless I can send him into the hands of God. In fact, back to Josephus, he indicated that Amram had received through a dream knowledge that his son would be the promised deliverer of all Israel. He related this dream to his wife, and together they decided, we are going to do all within our power to preserve the life of this newborn. But after 3 months, it's impossible to do so. They are determined, rather, to entrust the safety and care of the child to God, more so than depend on their own concealment of him. They believed that God would, in some way, for certain, procure the safety of their child in order to secure the truth of his own predictions. In some ways, this is a trial of faith and a sacrifice on par with the sacrifice of Abraham and Isaac. I think, how is this to think how this is the son of the promise? So, similarly, if Josephus, the historian, is right in describing about this dream, honey, we've just given birth to our deliverer, which means first we have to deliver him. What an incredible gut check God is asking of each person, each member of this family. Then Brother Howerson quotes Elder Hales, one of the previous 12 apostles in the restored gospel, a leader of the Latter day Saint Church. And he says something about this story that Brother Howerson finds beautiful. So Elder Hales says, he said, like Jochebed, we raise our family in a wicked, hostile world, a world as dangerous as the courts of Egypt, ruled by Pharaoh. So we, like them, have a similar world, okay? But then Brother Hales continues, but like Jochebed, we also weave around our children a protective basket, a vessel called the family, and guide them to safe places where our teachings can be reinforced in the home and the church along the way. At times, when our children are away from us, the Lord provides inspired Miriams to watch over them. That's a beautiful quote and a beautiful thought, Brother Halverson says. What are we doing to weave this ark in our lives? Are we pitching it within and without with the atonement of Jesus Christ to keep the water of the world out? Have we done all within our power to hide our children from the wicked world, to treasure them up unto us, and to prepare them as best we can for life out in Egypt? Do we weave around them a basket that can bear them up? Do we commend them to God, praying that there will be others watching from a distance, helping to keep them safe? Well, that's exactly what happens in the next verse. And Miriam stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. Wit is Old English for witness. Halverson adds these insights. In some ways, that would foreshadow Miriam's ongoing role in Moses' future life. I don't know the difference in age here, but this was an older sister who always kept her eye on little brother, even when he became mighty. Again, more women are here to deliver the deliverer. And verse 5, the daughter of Pharaoh. So she's the next female deliverer on our list of distinguished females. She came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. Now, this is a non Israelite, Jared Howerson says, yet she provides a saving role in Moses' life as well. Can we trust people who may be different from us, who may not share all of our beliefs and perspectives, yet who have that same mother's heart, who can see a need and recognize someone in peril and meet those needs? She's looking past differences. Think about it this way: the token of the covenant for a Hebrew son, the seed of Abraham, is circumcision on the 8th day. So if Moses has been a hidden treasure by his parents for 3 months, then he's already been circumcised. He bears the mark of the covenant. It will be almost instantaneous that Pharaoh's daughter would recognize, oh, this is an Egyptian child. It wouldn't even take, uh, it, it wouldn't even just take the circumcision. She might be thinking, what kind of Egyptian mother would leave a baby in a basket in the river anyway? So this was to her perhaps obvious that it was a Hebrew mother who did this uh, to protect her child. But why would the Hebrew mother do this? Because she probably realized my child will die possibly either way. Maybe this way he'll at least have some kind of fighting chance to survive. Not only am I entrusting him to God, I'm entrusting him to the kindness and compassion of a stranger. Well, Pharaoh's daughter was the perfect person to entrust her son to. She had a mother's heart. She looked past differences just like we need to look past the differences of her Egyptianness. She was the right person at the right place at the right time and performed her role perfectly and beautifully. Verse 6 And when she had opened the basket, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. Now that suggests just how hard it would have been for mother and father to keep him concealed those 3 months. This is not one of those no crying kind of babies that we imagine Jesus being in that manger. No, as soon as the lid of the basket is open, here's this weeping child. Yet, how does Pharaoh's daughter react? Verse 6 continues She had compassion on him and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. She immediately recognized this is not one of my kind, but it doesn't matter. This is one of my kind. Here's a human being just like I am. Instead of feeling prejudiced, she only felt compassion. I can only imagine how she felt about her father's edict and its inhumanity. And so a chance for her to stand up for to her own father, those would have been some interesting conversations. Most likely, as she chooses to go up against her father's commands, well, she's in a position that she'll probably get away with it. Yet it still required courage. And as we saw, it requires compassion. So she's prioritized the needs of a stranger over her own personal safety, or at least over the will of her own father. I can't change my father's law for the entire kingdom, but I can save the life of one baby boy. And she does. Brother Howerson continues again in the book of Acts, chapter 7, as we talked about in the introduction to the first chapter of Exodus. Stephen is recounting the Israelite history, speaking of Moses, and he says, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nursed him for her own son. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. He was this surrogate mother, or he has this surrogate mother to thank for that. Someone different, but someone who looked past differences. Someone courageous, someone compassionate. Don't ever underestimate those so called feminine traits. All of us, male and female, need to develop more of them. Now, our Hebrew scholar says this is a Hebrew baby, this is a child from the Hebrews, and that begs the question how did she know that? How did she know this was a Hebrew child? And I guess one possible answer is who else would you find in a basket in the river? But who knows? Maybe it could be one of the Egyptians who didn't want their child. And Nehemiah goes a dark direction that my mind wouldn't have gone this way naturally, but he's a scholar and from the Hebrew background, and he's an ancient scholar, manuscripts of he's a scholar of ancient manuscripts. So he's studied a lot about ancient cultures. He goes, it wasn't unusual in ancient times if you didn't want a child, you just left it on the side of the road. You left the child to be exposed so that if it would die by the elements, you wouldn't be guilty. That was extremely common up until a few hundred years ago. In fact, I think actually in some countries today, they still may do that. Another possibility is that she looked at the child and immediately saw that he was somehow different, perhaps ethnically different than the Egyptian children, and perhaps he was circumcised, which is what our LDS scholar alluded to. Now, verse 7, Brother Halverson continues, well, as this entire scene unfolds, who's watching from afar off? Miriam is, and she leaps up at the chance to make another difference. It's all going according to divine plan, so it seems. So she peeks out from among the bulrushes and says to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? Another example of right time, right place, right person. and the person again happens to be female. Little Miriam pipes up and says to Pharaoh's daughter, "You probably can't nurse the baby since you haven't given birth to any children of your own recently, but there are all too many, all too many women in Goshen that would give anything to nurse a child. Nursing mothers are a dime a dozen where I come from. Would you like me to go back and find one?" And hers won't be a random choice, Brother Howerson says. What's amazing about this is, again, Miriam's proactivity and her courage to speak up even to Pharaoh's daughter, to see a need and want to meet it, to help God bring this whole miracle full circle. Verses 8 and 9. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called. You better believe it, right? The child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away." So she's handing Miriam her little brother. "Nurse it for me. I will give thee thy wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. So she's taken it back to her mother, which is just amazing how quickly God's purposes at times can be fulfilled. How long did it take for Pharaoh's daughter to find the ark, or for Miriam to pipe up and say, "I've got a suggestion for you," and then come rushing back home and say, "Mom, you'll never believe what happened. We get to bring baby Moses back home. He's been pardoned by none other than the daughter of Pharaoh himself. She wants to raise the child as her own, which means for at least until the time he is weaned, you get to keep him. We get to keep him. You get to raise this baby." This is like Abraham's hand being stayed back when he had the knife raised above his son Isaac. This is a child being sacrificed and then returned to life. And if Josephus, the historian, was right, and they were praying and felt guided, his best chances were with God, not with the family. This is the most literal example of Ecclesiastes 11, verse 1. Cast your bread upon the waters, and it will return unto you after many days. Talk about an investment with a high rate of return. That's how God treats all of our sacrifices, and that's exactly what happened for Yocheved. My son is safe, and I get to nurse him. I get to raise him. I imagine she would wean him as slowly as she possibly could. But when it's done, she returned her child alive to Pharaoh's daughter. Verse 10. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, though he would always remain Jochebed's son as well. And she, meaning Pharaoh's daughter, called his name Moses, and she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." That's a perfect name for this baby. In Egyptian, Brother Halverson says, Moses means something like to beget a child. But in Hebrew, it means to draw out. And that's exactly what Pharaoh's daughter has done. She has drawn him out of the river, but more importantly, but more importantly, what would Moses do as he grew? He would draw all of Israel out of Egypt and bring them to a promised land. Moses would live up to his name in profound ways. But before we get there, think about the story thus far and realize that this deliverer has been delivered every step of the way by the women in his life, beginning with Shiphrah, Puah, the 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 the, 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 the Hebrew midwives, okay? Then Jochebed, his mother, Miriam, his sister, and now Pharaoh's daughter. I hope, Brother Howard says, that we realize when we focus on family, wait a minute, do children exist for parents or do parents exist for their children? We need to wrap our heads and hearts around that. Otherwise, children will seem more like a burden than a blessing. Relationships always partake of both. But to understand that the blessing so far outweighs the burden that the children are worth risking everything for. They're worth sacrificing all. They're worth putting your life on the line, as these women did for baby Moses. Their delivering him led to him delivering them. Now back to our Hebrew scholar Nehemiah, as he talks about this name, Moses. And she called his name in Hebrew Moshe. In English, we'd say Moses, and in Hebrew, Moshe. And she said, "For I drew him out of the water." And the three or four words in English, "I drew him," or drew him out, is the single word, Hebrew word, Mishitihu. And from Mishitihu, we get Moshe. Now, this is a very unusual name for an Egyptian woman to give a Hebrew child. She doesn't speak Hebrew. She's an Egyptian woman. And why on earth would she give him this name? And there are two things to comment on here. One is that the root word of the verb is Moshe, or possibly Mashi. It's possibly that this actually is an Egyptian word, or possibly a subdialect of Egyptian. Secondly, it's very common for names to have two meanings. That's even the norm. There'll often be one meaning that's given explicitly and a second meaning that's implied. And the explicit reason here is I drew him out of the water. The explicit reason, the implied reason, is the meaning of the word Moshe in ancient Egyptian, which 100 years ago, if you would ask a Jew what that was, they probably wouldn't have known. The ancient Israelites certainly knew it, and today we know it from Egyptology. But the name Moshe in ancient Egyptian means son. And we actually have several Egyptian rulers whose names incorporate the name Moses in them. For example, Ramses is actually Rosh Moshe, the son of Ra, and Ra being the sun god. We have Thutmoses and Shutmoses, who is another Egyptian pharaoh, who is a son of I can't do that either. Tchut, who is some other Egyptian god. So this was actually very common. It was very common to have this as an element in somebody's name after the name of certain Egyptian gods. And so when she called him Moshe, it meant two things. One is I drew him out of the water, and the other, it meant son. She simply called him son in her language. That's a great insight. And again, the different backgrounds I do appreciate. Now, I've got another quote from another Hebrew, a Jew. His name is Zair Lavi, and so that means he's a Levite. He's also currently a soldier in the Israeli army with the ongoing battle over there against Iran. And he says this: the Bible gives us a very simple explanation as to why Pharaoh's daughter called Moses Moses. This is something that every child in Israel who speaks Hebrew understands. But if you read your Bible in English, you cannot understand it. And she called his name Moses, and she said, because I drew him out of the water. What? That makes no sense in English. Let me explain. In Hebrew, the name Moses is Moshe, meaning to draw someone out of the water. And in Hebrew, that is Mishi Tihu. So this is why it says, I called his name Moshe, or Moshe, because Mishi Tihu. So basically, she just used two words. And to them, it makes perfect sense. She just says Moshe Mishi Tihu, which means she drew him out of the water. My son drew him out of the water in a sense. This is why she called him Moshe or Moses. Now, Papa John, my inserted footnote is simple, and it's just an observation. This seems to be a typical Hebrew word pun or a play on words, which is much like the holy divine name of the Father and the Son in Hebrew. And ask me, if you ever get a chance, to explain to you the play on words between the divine name of God the Father and the name Christ went by, his Hebrew name, while he was living on the earth during his earthly ministry, because each name points to the other. It's remarkable and beautiful. Now, Papa John continues, and as we compare what our Hebrew scholar Nehemiah Gordon shared here and with what our Israeli soldier Zair Lavi shares, I realize how fluid our understandings of Scripture can be, even with similar religious backgrounds. But that's typical also within Christianity between those who are within the same denominations or from different Christian denominations. Remember, and this is important to Papa John, we are all on our own faith journeys. And it's even more important that we help each other and realize we are all on a shared, so to speak, faith journey. So may we be supporters of each other as we move forward and upward together as a mixed multitude towards the true and living God of Israel, as we will see soon here in the book of Exodus, and this is my prayer. And when I'm talking about the mixed multitude, it wasn't just the Jews that left Israel as God freed them from slavery. Many of the Egyptians went with them who would rather serve the true and living God of Israel than the Pharaoh of Egypt. And so I'm likening that into my life and my friends and my children and my children's children, extended family and friends. Within the same religion that I was raised in, the LDS Church, and just other Christian denominations, and even my Hebrew acquaintances. Here at the ranch, I have some of the most fascinating conversations from different backgrounds, um, and it's been a good thing for me. Now, the story continues, and we have artwork here. The little baby Moses is suddenly a grown man. Verse 11. Well, Moses' childhood seemed to fly by as quickly as our own children's, Brother Halverson says. Verse 11, it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown. Wait, in verse 10, he was getting a name as a newborn. In verse 11, he's already grown up. That's how fast it goes. And Papa John can attest to that. The first 10 years of marriage were slow, and the next, well, we're at 36 years now, is just a blur. And so Brother Halverson says, I get it. Looking back to those days, they fly by in what feels like a mere verse or two. But here Moses has grown, and he went out unto his brethren, and he looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. So notice he calls them his brethren twice. What Moses is focused on here is their burdens. Like we said before, Moses would have known he was a Hebrew. There is no denying that, and the bearing of the token of the covenant is in his skin. There's no avoiding his own identity. But be aware of that and not be ashamed of that are two different things. Evidently, he is not ashamed of it. Now, Brother Howerson continues, I've been to Luxor. It's further south than Cairo. Luxor would have been the capital city of Egypt in the times of Moses. And the temple of Karnak is absolutely breathtaking. And in the Pearl of Great Price, in the book of Moses, chapter 1, and for my friends and family of other denominations, different churches in Christianity, the Pearl of Great Price is considered part of the LDS canon of Scripture. Not only do we believe in the Old Testament and the New Testament, but we believe in the Book of Mormon, which is a record of God's dealings with the people of the Americas, not just the Old World. Then we have the Doctrine and Covenants, which is the history of the church being restored in the 1800s and God's communications and revelations during that time. And then the Pearl of Great Price has a very unique history. In fact, I would say odd history. But in it, in Moses chapter 1, wouldn't any believer in the Bible want to hear of a conversation that Moses might have had, an additional, not included in the Bible record of Moses talking to God? So in Moses, chapter 1 of the Pearl of Great Price, Moses has this thought for the first time. As he's speaking to God, he realizes the nothingness of mankind. And in that verse, it says that man was nothing, which he never had supposed. And Brother Halverson then adds, if you grew up in the shadows of the columns of the temple of Karnak, man's nothingness would have never crossed your mind either. Man's everythingness, wow, we can pull this off. Well, it's interesting in this verse as he gets out away from the palace, it's not that the spectacle of Egypt that's awing him, like, wow. No, rather, it's the burden of his brethren, and that weighs heavy on Moses' heart. He's not looking up at the columns, he's looking down at those who build it, and his heart goes out to them. He hadn't forgotten who he was or where he was from. His days in the palace had not blinded him to the situation on the streets. I hope the same can be said of us, Brother Halverson adds, no matter what our circumstances might be. And now we know what happens next. Verse 12 Moses looked this way and that. He wanted to make sure he wouldn't be seen. Either that or he wanted to see if there was anyone else around to help him. I don't know if it was fear or hesitation, but when he saw that there was no man, either no man to help or no man to tell on him, he slew the Egyptian and hid his body. He hid him in the sand. Verse 13 When he went out the second day, behold, two men of the Hebrews strove together, meaning they're fighting each other. Sounds like they've been desensitized, Brother Halverson says, by the violence surrounding them. probably from by the hands of their masters. But he continues back to finish verse 13. He said to him that did the wrong, "Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow?" So again, he's identifying a guilty party. He's stepping in to make sure things are made right. He's defending what he perceives as the innocent, standing up for someone who's being bullied. He did that yesterday when it was an Egyptian attacking a Hebrew, and he's doing it here today when a Hebrew is striving or striking and contending with another Hebrew. So Moses, he's no respecter of persons. He's a respecter of the innocent. He's a respecter of the victimized. Sounds like someone tailor made to deliver Israel. And we'll see in a moment that Moses feels totally inadequate for the call. But in some ways, God can say, Moses, this is how you're wired. You've always been this way. But sadly, then verse 14, then the man that Moses was correcting said, "Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killed the Egyptian?" And Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." Notice what the man said. "Who made you a prince over me? Who made you a judge to be able to get into our affairs?" Now, I would imagine, Brother Howerson says, I would imagine that they know who Moses is. They know that Moses is one of them, not an Egyptian. I mean, if I were Amram, and we'll see it in Miriam and Aaron as well, I'd be telling all the neighbors, can you believe this miracle and how he's now in the palace? Especially if there's some sense that he's going to grow up to be their deliverer. And again, if Josephus, the historian, was right, I bet everyone knows he's one of us. This is like Joseph in Egypt 2.0, a Hebrew rising up in the courts of Egypt. He will be able to preserve us and deliver us. But sadly, this perpetrator didn't even see the shared humanity of his fellow Hebrew. That's the word Moses said. Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? You're both brethren. You're brothers. How can you do this to each other? Well, he didn't see this fellow Hebrew as his brother, and he certainly didn't see Moses as his brother either. Who put you above me? Who made you a prince or judge? We wonder sometimes, Brother Halverson continues, when someone is on the outside, like Matthew, for example, in the New Testament, he's a Jew, but he's working for the Romans, and the Jews can't stand him as a result. Evidently, there are those who look at Moses no differently and think, who put you in there? I don't know if it's envy, jealousy, or pride, but there's something there that's making Moses their enemy when he wasn't only meant to be their friend, but their brother. Then the other thing that he says, what are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? Now Moses is freaking out. Oh, they know. How could they have known? There was no man. Well, I guess there was. The Hebrew who Moses saved, at least that's possibly how it got out. He probably was thinking, uh, not thinking, and he shared and went around saying, I was saved from the Egyptians by the prince of Egypt himself. It makes more sense why Jesus would say, again, in his earthly ministry, to certain people near the beginning of his earthly ministry, he'd perform a miracle and say, tell no man, after he had healed them or blessed them. It's not yet time for me to perform my open public ministry. I don't want the Romans yet to know who I am. Now, that's what Brother Halverson says. But more importantly, Papa John, I just want to add, more importantly, Jesus didn't want the ruling Pharisees and Sadducees to know who he was. They were his true threat. Now, Halverson ends with this last three sentences. Now the people knew or know, and if the Hebrews know, how long will it be before the Egyptians know as well? My life will be in danger. Sure enough, that's exactly what happens. And now we're at verse 15. Now, when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. Now, not even his own daughter would stand in the way. If Moses had been using Pharaoh's daughter as some kind of human shield, that's over. It makes you wonder how Pharaoh has felt about him from the get-go. I mean, for every Hebrew boy to be slain, why on earth do I have one growing up in my own palace? Well, when he finds out this is the last straw, he's ready to slay Moses. Again, how would Pharaoh have known? At least at the beginning, it was only Hebrews who knew about this. But I suppose that the Egyptian taskmasters would have realized that someone was missing. And would the Hebrew slaves have ratted Moses out? Maybe. I mean, the type that we just met in the previous verses certainly would have. Why are they so bitter about Moses' special treatment? This is basically the crab pulling the other crab back into the pot theory, and we all know that story. So the verse ends with verse 15. Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. And Brother Howerson, he's such a great scholar. He says, now this story has been flying by. Just a few verses ago, he was a baby. Now he's full grown, and then he's out of Egypt entirely. But where do we find him as the pages turn in this story? We find him at a well, and there's no better place to start a new chapter of life than there. Ask Abraham's servant as he was sent to meet Rebekah. Ask Jacob as he finds his Rachel. If you're following the example, I bet marriage is probably coming up soon. Verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. Ta-da! And Midian in Hebrew is pronounced Midian. And they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flocks. Brother Howerson then says, now with that description, it seems like we're about to meet a girl who is tailor-made to join the family business, someone who's used to working around wells, able to draw out the living water to give all who thirst, someone who feeds her father's flocks and gathers them to that source of living water. This is going to be a good place for Moses to find a covenant companion. Now that begs the question, is he marrying outside of the covenant, though? Well, we just saw that her father is the priest of Midian. We see his name in just a moment, but Midian, when we studied Abraham in the aftermath of Sarah's death, he remarries a woman named Keturah, and among their children is a son named Midian or Midian. I'll just stay with Midian. So the Mennonites, Midianites. I actually have a friend that grew up in the Midianite faith, the Mennonite faith, and which is a cousin to the Amish. And I met many Amish people back in New York and Pennsylvania area. Anyway, I'm fascinated by the different perspectives we all have. But back to the story. So the Midianites would still be Abrahamic, or at least that under that broader umbrella. Not the birthright like Isaac, not Ishmael, not Midian, but still under the Abrahamic covenant. Just like the other tribes are still of the house of Israel, even though they're not of Joseph's birthright. So Brother Howerson says, so is it okay for Moses to marry the daughter of the priest of Midian? And what about Asnat? Asnat was Joseph's, when he married Joseph's daughter, or she's Egyptian. I'm sorry, when Joseph marries an Egyptian with Pharaoh's permission, she's Egyptian. So the question we can apply to him as well. Isn't he marrying outside the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Well, some say it's not his fault. He's in bondage and he's working for Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is one that kind of sets up this marriage. Okay, so it's not his fault for marrying outside the covenant. Fine. But then again, if it's the Hyksos dynasty of Egypt, is there some kind of Abrahamic umbrella for them as well? Brother Halverson says again, I don't know. But the fact that she is the daughter of Potipharah, who's the priest of the city of On, what kind of priesthood is that? Is that Egyptian priesthood? Is that some kind, or is there some connection to Israel? Well, he continues, we saw Abraham go down to Egypt to teach truth in the book of Abraham in the Pearl of Great Price. So again, referring to that same book that has extra scriptures from the LDS view regarding Moses and Abraham. I'm telling you, it's a very interesting read. And any Bible believing Hebrew or Christian, I think, would appreciate those records as much as Papa John does. All right, so has some of that been passed down, is Brother Halverson's question, because we know from the book of Abraham that the paths did cross through that country. He continues, again, we don't even know enough about Asnat's background, but we can safely assume that she was either part of the covenant in a broad-speaking Abrahamic umbrella sort of way, or raised in a religious family who then converts when she comes to know and understand the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, and the God of Joseph, her husband. Now that's powerful. So either way, the fact that she gives birth to Ephraim and Manasseh, the birthright boys, would again suggest that this is not outside the covenant of Abraham. So whether by birth or by conversion, Asenath is totally okay, and so is Zipporah, who will soon become Moses' wife. Again, that's really interesting information, and that might be a new angle for my Protestant friends and Catholic friends. But now you understand the LDS view of possibilities. And that's really the truth of it. When it all comes down to it, what do we all really know? Well, the Spirit I cannot deny. And so I do love and serve God, and I delight in doing so. Verse 17, and the shepherds came and drove them, these 7 daughters of Jethro, away. So the shepherds drove away the 7 daughters, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flocks. Now that sounds a lot like Jacob with Rachel, but also it sounds totally true to form for Moses. I defend the defenseless. It's how I'm wired. I look for people being bullied, and I stand up against their enemies to make sure that they receive the justice and the mercy they deserve. Again, we can't ask for a better deliverer than Moses. Verse 18, and when they came to Reuel, and if you didn't know it, that's another name for Jethro, or in Hebrew, Yithro, their father. So the daughters have returned home, and we'll get to know his name, Jethro, later. And in this verse, he said, how is it that they have come so soon today? So here's a dad who has an eye for efficiency that will come in handy later as he explains to the importance of delegation to his future son-in-law, Moses. But here, his daughters, how did you get back so quick? We've got this big flock and herds, and there's no way. Did you shortcut the system here? Are they trying to get out of their chores? Now, our Hebrew scholar says this in Exodus 2:18 and in Numbers 10:29, he, Reuel or Yitro, in fact, in a single passage, he is referred to as Reuel, as Yitro, and as Jethro in that single context when Moses first meets the family. So which one is it? Apparently, Yitro may have actually been a title rather than his name. Anyhow, they may all be titles. Okay, so another twist, but it's a healthy twist that we can consider as a possibility. Verse 19, they said, an Egyptian delivered us. Dad, he delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and also drew water enough for us and watered the flock. Now they don't know Moses' true identity yet. From the outside, he looked like an Egyptian to them. And our Methodist minister, Keith Johnson, we haven't heard from him for quite a while. He adds this. It says that he got up and he came to their rescue and watered their flocks. Nehemiah interrupts him. Yeah, he vayashara'an, for the root yasha, yasha, the same root as the word Yehoshua, or English Joshua. In other words, he Yashua'd them. Now, I know what that means, but for those that don't know Hebrew, and I know so little, but to Yeshua someone literally means he saved them. And that's the most common meaning of the word Yeshua in the Tanakh. It means to save somebody from some kind of physical harm. And that's from our Hebrew scholar. And Papa John just wants to make you aware. Christ didn't go by Jesus, and his last name wasn't Christ. Those are Christian inventions. Those are, well, they were doing their best to understand words like Messiah, which means anointed one. So Christ becomes the replacement for Messiah because the Greeks used a Grecian lotion, kind of a Christ, to polish their armor. So anointing their armor, the only word that came close to Messiah was Christ, or has evolved into Christ. So if he wasn't known as Jesus, what was he known as? He was known as Yeshua, or we would say Joshua, which we were just told right here. The root word for Joshua, Yeshua, is salvation. He saved them. You are beginning to see hints of what Papa John gets so excited about. Now, back to Keith Johnson, our Methodist minister. He says, this is a big mistake. that I see made many, many times. The word you just used, Yeshua or Yoshia, are two different words. It's the same root that sometimes people will see that word, and Nehemiah is bringing it to the forefront here, but they'll see that word and then they'll say in their, and he's describing Papa John here, oh, that's the divine name, not realizing that it's not the divine name, it just has the same shared root meaning. But we're not seeing the actual name, Yeshua, as much as we're seeing the word for salvation or for saving or for the root of to save. So there's some spiritual maturity that's needed and that Papa John's trying to gain. And just historical context, again, if we can get back to the original history, language, and context, we're going to gain so much more understanding than otherwise is only available with the King James translation and the other English translations. Verse 20, and Jethro said unto his daughters, where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. Come on, daughters. I raised you better than that. You know the laws of hospitality. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter. So there's a rapid romance for you. And Zipporah means bird. Her name means bird, Brother Halverson says. I think it's a beautiful image for this woman who is willing to take flight wherever the Lord leads her husband Moses. And the woman who also happens to give wings to her husband whenever he feels inadequate to fly in the direction of the mission God has laid out for him. He's very poetic, Brother Halverson is. Verse 22, back to Brother Halverson as he reads 22, he says, and she bare him a son. Again, we're flying through the narrative. And he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. So Gershom or Garshom means a stranger there. Garshom is a word that is used in Hebrew and throughout the Old Testament for a stranger, someone who is a foreigner, someone who comes into the land. In all those instances, Israel is told you better take good care of them because you are a stranger in a strange land once you were a stranger in a strange land once yourselves. So here Moses is feeling that as he's here in Midian, perhaps describing even how he felt back in Egypt as a Hebrew in the Egyptian court. People who are oppressed deserve to be delivered. The marginalized deserve to be remembered. They were all strangers in a strange land, and hospitality requires that we take care of one another. So my son, Gershom, I hope you never forget that, and I doubt he did. His name comes from the word meaning to drive out or to cast out. Now, it's interesting that the LDS scholar doubts that Gershom ever forgot the meaning of his name. But now we're back to our Hebrew scholar, and we learned something interesting. The name Gershom is very interesting because it literally means stranger there. And it's interesting, where does he mean? Where does he mean? Is it the land of Midian, or does he mean the land of Egypt? Because there would be imply it's the other place rather than where you are currently. I think when Moses gets to Midian, he realizes, I grew up in that land, but I was a foreigner there. I was never a citizen of the land. I was treated like a foreigner, even though I was in the house of a king. And a little point about Gershom is that he is an interesting character who appears in Judges 18:30, and there we read about how the children of Dan set up an idol in the town of Dan, which is in northern Israel. And it says, and Jonathan, or Johanan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the day of the exile of the land. And when it says Manasseh, that's almost the same letters as Moses or Moshe, except it has a nun, the letter nun in it. And that nun is called a hanging nun, which means it's actually written slightly above the line, hanging as if it's someone came in and added that nun. It's preserved in the Masoretic text. In the text, it's preserved by the Jewish scribes as a hanging nun. It's identified in the scribal notes as a hanging nun, indicating that at some point someone added the nun. And the explanation that we commonly hear, even in the early rabbinical sources, is that originally this was Johanan, the son of Gershon, the son of Moses. And that's a zealous scribe who didn't want the name of Moses sullied by having this evil priest as a grandson. So when that name came, he added the letter as a hanging nun to it. It's not really Moses, it's Manasseh. Apparently, this was really the grandson of Moses who claims the authority. And because Moses was my grandfather, the one who gave us the Torah, and they'll say, but you're not allowed to worship idols. And he'll say, what do you mean? I am from a family of tradition, and my tradition is far more powerful than some book that you brought to me. I think there's a warning here. Even in the line of Moses, you can't override the word of God that Moses wrote down for us. And Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and that's what's considered the Torah to the Hebrews. Verse 23 to 25, and it came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed. They groaned, is another word for that, by reason of the bondage, and they cried up again unto God by reason of the bondage. Now there's an important world event, the passion of Pharaoh, which means the mantle of authority will then pass to his son, the brother of the daughter of Pharaoh. Of course, we know Hollywood always has a heyday with this, whether it's the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston or the Prince of Egypt or any of those other remakes that are made of this story. But there is a new Pharaoh upon the throne of Egypt, and perhaps a new day for Egypt, for Israel. It's definitely going to be a new day for Israel because the chapter ends with, and God, or Elohim, heard their groanings, and Elohim remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And Elohim looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. Anytime you are suffering and wondering, where is God? Look at the verbs. He hears, he remembers, promises made. He looks and has respect now. That's an interesting one. The verb had respect means he acknowledged, he took notice, he was concerned with them, he felt sorry for them. If you actually look at the Hebrew word, which all of these words are translated from, it's that word that we often see, yada, which means to know. To know in the visceral way, to taste, to partake of, to internalize. And God is doing all of that. This is experiential on his part. This is coming to know, coming down to see, to share in the fellowship of suffering. That's what Paul talks about in Philippians 3. And that's exactly what God is doing here. Moses, I know, is as deep of a, I'm sorry, Moses, I know, in as deep a way as you can say in terms of intimate experiential knowledge. I know exactly what my people, Israel, are going through. And I remember the covenant I made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I told Abraham that I would bring the people back as soon as the iniquity of the Amorites is full. It's time for their deliverance. And Moses, you are my deliverer. And that's where we're going to be heading into with chapter 3. Thank you for your time and attention. Papa John really gets going fast. There's so much information to cover here. Between now and the next episode, I just remind you to keep on studying, serve God, serve others, live the gospel, and I'll talk to you again soon.